I've been an outdoorsman most of my life, and as a kid I lived in the Wyoming wilderness for almost 2 years, in a cabin on a nature preserve. Electricity was only through a generator, and we, along with my siblings, had to boil water from a spring. This was all before I was 10 years old, and in case of an emergency, it would be at least an hour before we would get help or assistance. I used to hunt game, which I'm not particularly proud of, but it happened and I saw some strange things in the wilderness. So when I say I don't go into the woods of the Cascadia Range, I'm not afraid of the wilderness. So I was 23 years old, his name was Darren, and he invited me to camp. This place is a few miles off a logging road, about an hour down a bumpy road. It's me, Darren, and his good friend Wade. The place is a 10-minute drive from the logging road. When I got there, I was beyond excited. The small lake was beautiful, untouched by people for years. When I got there, I was somewhat reassured by the fact that at least someone had been camping for the last month, and there was extra wood lying around the fire. We ate lots of chili peppers and hot dogs, and in the evening the boys went into the woods. They came back with a sealed bucket that had been buried a year ago, and we opened it up to retrieve some of the MREs they had stashed in their stash. All in all, it was one of the best trips of my adult life. But that night was a little different. I fell asleep in a tent for the first time in my life. I don't even know. Anxiety of some sort. I couldn't figure out what it was, but I wasn't used to camping without my dad. Darren had bought his .38 caliber pistol specifically for predator defense, but it was the only gun he was armed with. Anyway, the next day it rained like the PNZ'd and we tried to wait it out, but eventually finished, packed up, and headed home. Darren and I wanted to go camping again next year, so I decided to give it another try. I even convinced a lot of my friends to come with us. There ended up being 6 of us and a big white German shepherd. Myself, Darren, Wade, James, Charles, and Rita, James's friend, and the dog Moogie. Knowing I wouldn't be comfortable last time, I brought my 12 gauge with me this time. James wanted to practice target shooting, which was not allowed at the official range, with full canisters, gallon jugs, etc. To make our weekend more comfortable, this time we brought an ATV. On the first day, as we were packing up, we heard music playing on the wood floor near the tree line at the south end of the lake. It was visible from the road, unlike last year. Deciding we were only Americans, James and I set out to investigate the source of the noise pollution. We have to respect the coolness of a police officer when 2 large armed men emerge from the bushes, me with a 12 gauge, James with a .308. We introduced ourselves and mentioned the others, but didn't say where we were staying, just nearby. And that's where it got weird. Probably cops minding their own business, but this guy wanted to know where we were. He then named his favorite places nearby and wanted to try 2 other places within a few miles of the tree line. At this point, it kind of indicated that we were the only place where we wouldn't have any problems. Finally, Darren showed up and told us that he had talked to the landowner a few years ago, and they had no objection to our presence. The policeman got angry, but we lied and said we would check out the place he told us. Neither of us trusted the guy when we left, so we eventually decided not to. It's like, I don't know, a horror movie. All this shadowy copy tells us to go to a place where we're going to get kidnapped by his friends on top of a mountain. We leave very early, but we pack up, make a fire, and get into a small 4-person boat. This was the highlight of the day. Charles used a small axe to cut down all the dry wood between the axe and the fire stove, but it was amazing endurance and strength. It was a good night, but as darkness fell, I felt even more uneasy. We thought it was Moogie, but at this moment he was near the fire, raised his head and looked in the direction of the fall. We thought he must have been swimming because he was so drunk, so we went down with flashlights to pull him out of the water to shore. Then we heard peanuts. Charles, Wade, and Darren passed out in the middle of the night. Rita, along with Maggie, had been making noise in the fireplace, and James and I had been out all night getting wood to start the fire. It was a familiar tune from around these parts, but something was off. I have a certain gift for imitating bird sounds, so I noticed right away that the end of the frame had somehow ended. Almost always when the last trail sound is heard, the nest seems to unfold. James, who wasn't as overtly enthusiastic as I was, said, "That sounds like someone I know." We listen in just a few more times. Then I try to make noise for an hour. Silence. After a few minutes, when the noise makes you think it makes sense, it starts again. But not for an hour. About half a second after the first one, a second one goes off. The new owl looks like a real rich guy, like a fresh start. And after the first shot of the real one, the fake shot went silent. James joked again and said, "Did that owl tell the other owl to shut up?" I decided to scream, "You better listen to your wife." After my yell, we both hear a loud rumble, almost similar to the sound of wood made by Charles. At this point, Moogie goes completely crazy, barking and screaming. At that point, he was still having glandular issues, so he had that nasty thing removed as well. He was threatened, and luckily Rita couldn't get away from him. If he really wanted to move, he wouldn't have been able to, but right now I'm too scared. I hunted cougars and bears again in my life, and never in all my hunting had I been as confused as I was this time. I was paralyzed for a full minute. I yelled across the lake that whoever it was had better go because we had plenty of guns. And again there was silence. Thankfully, for the rest of the night. I woke up right after Darren woke up, so I skipped breakfast and my morning swim in the lake. Other than that, I got up and I wanted to go to the bathroom so badly. James had already explained the sounds to the others as they prepared for their various adventures. Darren, Wade, and Rita wanted to listen to the radio and relax. Moogie had run off after lunch, so we decided to look for him while checking out the spot where the noises had been heard yesterday. But almost immediately there was a rabbit on the other side of the lake behind my head. Charles was scared too, but he had an axe. I had a gun, and James had a pistol and a .45 caliber pistol in his lap. So we went on and searched for several hours. Mostly I was trying to see if we could find trees. Then we came to the east shore of the lake and positioned ourselves on the west side. What? Charles, James, and I rushed over to it. There we saw something that looked like a human footprint. Just one. But it was a very clear trail in the dirt. There was even a small well left. Honestly, my first thought was Bigfoot, so I took off my boots and compared sizes. I'm a very large guy with very large feet, so it's not surprising that when I put it next to my footprint, my muddy feet appear smaller than this footprint. But the weird thing is that it was for another print that was supposed to be a pinky. I don't know, maybe like another toe. We also found some trees, but none of them looked fresh, so we decided to go around the North Lake and come back to the others, making a full circle. Woogie was fine, and when the smell of food was in the air, he turned back. Honestly, we all had a great day. They drank, ate, and laughed because they were paranoid. We heard some shots very close that day, and warned the shooters that there were people and animals nearby. The gunmen among us did go out to meet people, and all of us except Darren and Wade joined the old man and his wife in shooting at anything. Part of me thought there was something hidden here that wouldn't get in our way. But I was very wrong. So, a little bit about Charles. Ever since he was a kid, Charles has had a wonderful dream. It's funny most of the time, but sometimes a little scary. Also, he would often fall asleep and talk to you while you were still asleep. But anyway, we all went to bed, and I was one of the first ones in because I slept for about 4 hours and was pretty drunk by then. "Hey, who's that? Captain, stay in your tent." Charles, who at this time was asleep by the fire, not in his tent, or should I say screaming. I jumped up, grabbed my gun, and turned on my flashlight. "What happened?" I screamed. Adrenaline filled my entire being. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. "Get closer to the fire. Kay, use your words." She continues to scream, eventually waking James and Rita, who are in the tent closest to Charles. "What?" yells James. Moogie starts to rise and apparently smells in his tent again, because he and Rita are like, "Oh, Moog, that's gross." Then I hear someone climbing into the captain's tent, Get out of here! I start to untie the tent. Not you, Captain. Hold on, it's here for you. To this day, everyone denies hearing it, but I swear I heard someone whisper, "Captain." And then I heard branches crunching near my tent. James comes out of the tent, and a few seconds later I hear him laughing. It's just the bottom of the water. Charles is dreaming. But then Charles says he wasn't dreaming. When I went out and lit the fire, he agreed to do it. We put one of those big pots on a tree branch, and it could easily be mistaken for a white dress standing in the dark. Satisfied that there was nothing there, despite my protests, we all went to bed. Charles stayed in the tent the rest of the night, and I decided to spend the rest of the night on patrol. It was one of the scariest nights of my life, if not the scariest, because I heard more activity in that forest than I had ever heard before. Moogie also woke up when he heard tree branches cracking, and he threw up many times. Then I heard a loud rumble. They must have been only 10 meters away from me. Then I jumped to my feet, ran to where the noise was coming from, and shined my flashlight. I've seen antlers in my life. I've seen them run away from me. But what's unusual about deer is this. They don't stand, and they run on 2 legs. Moogie cried and screamed. I took aim, let the light fall, and fired. I didn't see him turn and run. Hot. The shots continued until I ran out of 6 shells. The others ran out of their tents in fear. I told them what had happened, and then no one slept until morning. Fortunately, nothing else happened that night, and I think Moogie refused to leave the tent, giving the others a chance to take me seriously. After all, he was a sweet and brave dog, and if other dogs bullied him in the park, he knew how to attack them. But tonight was different. The last thing that happened on the last day was when Darren and Wade went to bury the bucket and put the new supplies in it. They always knew where the stash was buried because there was another pile of earth they used as a reference point, and that trash was gone. It was there when I finished the job 2 days ago, but it's gone now. It hasn't been rooted, dragged, or even disturbed. It's like it never happened. We honestly thought about it until we found the bucket hole we'd made earlier, still dug and covered by a small poncho. It didn't make sense to us. Darren said I'm never coming back here now, so we might as well take these things with us, to which we all agreed and left after lunch. This is why I never go camping in the Cascade Wilderness without at least 2 people who know how to handle a gun. I don't know what was said at camp that night, but whatever it was, I'll never forget it. Some people never stop searching until they find the truth. If you have a detective's eye, this June trip is for you. Play as the intrepid June Parker and follow her story to solve her sister's death. You will have hundreds of beautifully illustrated scenes to view to uncover new murder mysteries from the 1920s. I really enjoyed playing this game in my spare time. It reminds me of one of those old school books where you have to look for different things or people. But the best part about this game is that you are investigating a murder mystery, so you have to find clues that will help you solve the crime. I also like some of the unique features, such as being able to build your own island estate with extensive gardens and beautiful buildings. But I especially like the storytelling contest, where you can even win some prizes. I know some of your listeners are talented writers, so you might want to check that out. Overall, it's a really fun game that helps me get back to work on my phone when I have a spare minute or 2. I just recently started playing it, so I'm currently going through Chapter 3 and continuing to kill Claire and Harry Van Buren. It can be downloaded for free. It's a great way to relax if you, like me, like puzzles. So, get your first clue by downloading June Travel today. The game is available on Android and iOS mobile devices and on PC via Facebook Games. It was 10 years ago, but I still remember it well. I was 18 years old and living with my parents and brothers in a small town near the Rocky Mountains in Canada. It was summer, probably 11:30 p.m. The night was clear. Visibility was good. We no longer live in that town, but we're now close to it. My friend, who was 17 at the time, also lived with us. He was with me and saw what I saw. So at that time, me and my family were part of what we now call a cult. It's relevant to this story, because that's why we were late and my parents' door was locked. At this point, my friend and I were told to live with the cult leaders. There's no point in this story to explain why, but the cult leader's house was in a back alley a few houses down from his parents' house. We didn't want to live with them, so we spent as much time as possible at our parents' house, and in the evening we went to the cult leader's house. Like I said, it was around 11. It's 30 p.m., summer, clear night, and we walk through the back door of my parents' house to the cult leader's house. Mom closes the door behind us, turns off the lights, and I guess goes to bed. My friend and I walk out into the backyard and find ourselves in an alley. Our yard has no fence and goes straight out into the alley. But we turn left because the cult leader's house is a few houses across the alley with slow climbs and turns. Hopefully this makes sense visually. Behind us, the alley leads straight ahead to 5 or more houses, and as we entered the alley, we could hear the trash cans of several houses behind us. I can imagine someone banging on it and trying to keep it from falling over, but it still bangs. Since we live near the mountains, we're used to the city being full of wildlife, bears, deer, and sometimes even swamps. So my first instinct is to scare a bear away when it walks into someone's yard. I immediately panic and wonder if I should go back into the yard and knock on my parents' locked back door or quickly run for the cold house. I make these calculations in a split second because everything happens so fast. My friend repeats my name over and over and starts holding my hand. While I'm trying to figure out what to do, he's looking at the trash cans. Suddenly he yells and I look over my shoulder. Before I can think or realize anything, I see him. It was huge. The flight. It flew over our heads, about 4 feet above us, and kept climbing about 15 feet. There was no time to think anymore. At this point, we both just screamed loudly. But here's the best part. It flew right up to the cult leader's house. He landed between the cult leader's house and the neighboring house and disappeared. When he came down, the streetlights across the alleyway illuminated him well, so we could get a good look at him. I can't imagine what it was like or why to this day it wasn't routine at all. Its wingspan was about 8-9 feet, maybe more. It was coal black, the darkest I've ever seen. I have never seen anything like it in color before or since. It had no distinguishing features, no feathers, no head, no eyes, no beak, no legs, nothing. The best way I can describe it is to imagine something like a huge bat with no tail and lots of big, long wings. A friend of mine described it this way. Imagine the shadow of a large flying creature, but a much more massive and darker shadow. It wasn't obvious. If you touched it, you would certainly feel it, or at least it would seem that way to you. It made no noise other than the trash cans, so it was definitely a physical being, so beautiful you could tell it flew so smoothly. The method of weaving between the houses was very simple, and the size was impressive. All in all, we were completely shocked, awed, and very, very scared. We stood there for a while and watched to see if he would come back, but he never did. Finally, we got ready and decided to go to the temple, although the door wasn't locked, so the creature went in there. And when we got inside, we went straight to one of the leaders. It was a woman. There were 2 of them, a man and a woman, and they told him everything they could, in utter terror and confusion. And when we had finished, he stopped, looked at us with a strange expression on his face, and said simply, and I remember it verbatim, "Where there is great light, there is great darkness." Then he walked away. My friend and I stood at the door for hours, wondering if we would ever see him again, but we never did, and we never saw him again. I tried searching Google several times after the incident, but couldn't find anything even remotely similar to what I saw that night. I'm sure you all have seen this question before. Or does anyone have any ideas? If so, I'd love to hear your opinions. Thank you so much for listening to me. This happened to me when I was a teenager. I was 16 at the time, maybe 12 years ago. One night, my sister and I invited 2 friends over for a sleepover. It was in the middle of nowhere, and we lived in a small town, actually in a rural area. It was surrounded by swamps and lots of farmland. My sister and one of my friends went to bed very early, and my other friend and I stayed up and talked for a while. The mattress was on the floor next to the 3 large windows in my sister's second-floor bedroom. These windows faced the street below, and across the street to our left was an elementary school. The parking lot of this school was in the center of our view, and next to it, to our right, was a farmer's field. So we talked until 2:33 at night. The windows were open because there was a wonderful warm breeze blowing, and suddenly my friend stopped talking and said, "Oh, who is that?" I follow his gaze and see that he is looking at a farmer's field. 2 figures are coming out of the field in the dark. They haven't noticed the streetlights yet, so I can't tell their identities, but I think it's one of the neighborhood kids. My friend and I continue to watch in silence as the 2 men approach the streetlight and begin to approach the house. I think it was someone I knew because there were several teenagers there who were often late. The men would come to the house and sometimes talk to me and my sister through the window. As they came closer and closer, we began to see their appearance, and I was completely stunned by the sight of them. The 2 men were no taller than 5 feet tall. They were identical in every facial feature we could discern, and I was completely identical. Both were Caucasian, light-skinned, both were completely bald, and both wore the same long brown dress. I would describe them as follows. They looked like monks, probably wearing monks' robes. Honestly, they looked like little people. Even though they clearly didn't look like anyone I know, as they approached the house, I start yelling loudly to them, "Hey, hey!" and then start shouting out the names of different people in town. No, I guess I was a little incredulous and thought it was a joke or something. At this point, my friend goes silent. These creatures pull up in front of my parents' car, which is parked on the street so we can see them very clearly, and then immediately turn around and head into the field. They never returned my calls or even looked at me. But apparently they were talking about each other, although my friend and I couldn't make out any sounds from them. We watched them cross the road, and then instead of going back to the field, they start walking down the road. We watch them until we can no longer see them. If you follow this path, you get to other fields, but away from the houses. My friend and I talked for another hour. He is a very devout Christian, so he believes in demons. Personally, I have no idea. It could be a very good demonic scene, but it's also, I don't know, random. The next day we told everyone, and everyone was shocked, even my parents. I have a lot of questions. Like, why did they go home and then come back? I wondered if they did it on purpose because they knew we were there and wanted us to see them or something. Why did they look so much alike? Why were their eyebrows short? Why were they wearing brown clothes? Also, why were they in a field at 3 in the morning? I Googled and found nothing. I found a strange video on YouTube where a woman claims to have been visited by 7 beings similar to the ones my friend saw, but I couldn't find anything else. The woman said they are mediums who know the future. I don't know that. But anyway, I would love to hear if anyone has seen these beings or what you think of them. Thank you for listening. Several other people have asked me to share my impressions of my time in the cult. Strange things happened at home, and when we moved to the same town as the leaders, they increased in frequency. I briefly discussed some of the events. The first was when a friend and I, coming out of the field at 3 in the morning, saw 2 small beings in long brown clothes, very similar to each other. The second experience occurred when another friend and cult member and I saw large black beings flying over our heads. It was out of shape and about 8 or 9 feet tall. And when it's informal, that doesn't mean it has any features. No head, no eyes, no arms, no legs, nothing. It happened in the alley between our house and the cult leader's house. The other experience I had was a little different. When we were in the cult, the leaders decided to move in with them. I think I mentioned this in a previous story. There were 5 teenage girls living with them at the time, and I was one of them. One night I was working at the kitchen table with the same friend who saw a black creature flying past me, and all of a sudden my back suddenly stiffened, and I mean really scared. It made me angry, and I tried to figure out what was going on. Finally, after a minute, I asked a friend to look because it was really starting to piss me off. I pull my shirt up and he looks at me in confusion. I ask him what he saw, and he says I have 3 long nails on my back. They look like cat claws, but they are too big for cat claws. The lines are very wide apart, cat claws. They didn't have a cat. He was very calm about it, so I went to the bathroom to see for myself. They were located in the middle of my back, also behind my bra strap, and I couldn't reach them at all. To be honest, I didn't really care at the time. I thought it had happened before, and somehow I could feel it now. But then it happened again, about 2 months later. I was playing a computer game at a table in the room we shared with 2 other girls, and I felt the same burning sensation as before. I went over again and tried to feel what was going on. I go into the bathroom and lift up my dress. I see 3 more lines, very similar to the previous one, but not as long and slightly deviating. I was a little worried this time, but I told myself that it must be my clothes or something. I put it out of my mind and never thought about it until years later when I heard about other people having the same experience. The next event happened even before I moved. My sister and I were in her basement room. It was evening. Next to his room is a utility room and then stairs to the upper floor. Her bedroom door was closed and we were just chatting in her room. We were about to go upstairs when suddenly, out of nowhere, a scream or shout was heard from the common room. As far as I could tell, it didn't sound like barking, because it didn't sound like a dog barking or a big cat barking or anything like that. If I had to describe it, it sounds like the deep, low growl of a big cat, like a lion or a tiger, and in volume it sounds like a big cat, maybe closer to a bear. It's hard to explain, though. When I first heard it, I was shocked and immediately scared. Below, thoughts swirled about how I could hear the sounds of a wild animal in the house. We didn't have a dog, by the way. Then I figured it must have been someone walking a big, aggressive dog down the street, and even though it didn't sound like a dog, the sound was somehow coming through the weird walls or something. I tried to figure out what it was, but I think something primal was stirring inside of me. Fear gripped me as the screams grew louder and approached her door. I looked at my sister in horror and saw her frozen in place. His face expressed fear and confusion. I remember that time I was running away from his bedroom window. My sister told me to stop and shut up, but I couldn't. The force was getting stronger and seemed to be at the door. I couldn't do anything either, so I started screaming and calling my mom, calling her over and over. When I did, the crying stopped. I scream for about a minute, then we stop and listen. There is no more screaming and everything is quiet. My heart is racing and I have to tell my sister that I need to stop. He tries to stop me, but I open the door anyway. I quickly look around, but we can't see anything, so I run upstairs and my sister follows me. We run to my mom and tell her. Another incident happened when I was in my sister's room. That night, I decided to spend the night in his room. We were still getting ready for bed and talking, and almost as soon as the conversation was over, when the room was completely silent, a voice was heard from behind the bed that broke the silence. It was a loud whisper, and it said my name clear as day. My name is no different. I couldn't tell if it was a male or female voice, but it was just a very loud whisper. I immediately grabbed my sister and called her name. I was very scared. She immediately reacted and said I heard it too. That scared the hell out of me. I clung to him, trying to understand what I heard and the possible reason, but he told us to ignore it. I couldn't get up though, so I got up to get a glass of water and calm down. That night I slept on the couch and was absolutely terrified. Anyway, I'll have to tell more stories again because this is getting a little long, but yeah, here are some of my experiences in this cult. I don't know how to explain most of them, but these are things that stay with you. About 10 years ago, when I was a teenager and still living with my parents, a very strange and scary thing happened. All sorts of strange things happened in this particular house. Too many to describe right now, but this incident was really disturbing. It was late at night, or maybe even early in the evening. It was very dark outside. The whole house was asleep. I have 4 brothers. My brother's room was across the hall from our parents' room, and my sisters and I slept in the basement. My parents were suddenly awakened by the sound of my brother, who was 5 years old at the time. He was yelling at my father in a loud and frightened voice. My father jumped out of bed and rushed to my brother's room. It took him about 3 seconds to reach my brother's room. When he opened the door, the screaming suddenly stopped. He saw that my siblings were also sound asleep. He carefully whispered something to his brother, who heard his voice and felt that he must have had a bad dream or something, but got no response. My father thought it was very strange, but thought it was some kind of nightmare or a reaction to a dream. He went back to his room, but just before he went to bed, the moment he sat down on the mattress, they heard my voice, this time screaming, "Mommy, mommy, 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 mommy." They are just as scared as my brother, and I need help, and that's my voice, just like my brother's voice. But this time the sound came from the open bedroom window, where the yard and the alley. My mom and dad looked at each other in confusion. This time my mom jumped out of bed and decided to check on me in the basement, even though she heard the noise outside. He collapsed, and I memorized the moment. He woke me up in the living room and asked if I would call him. I was tired and fell asleep thinking he was acting weird, and of course I said no and went to bed. As he climbs the stairs, he hears my voice again, the same voice of fear calling him, but this time in front of the house. He stood at the big window in the living room and looked outside, but there was no one there, not even cars passing by. Everything was ready, and the screaming suddenly stopped. At that moment, he realized that something was wrong. He went back to bed, talked to his father for a while, prayed, and then fell asleep. They didn't hear another sound that night, but the next day he told us what had happened and we were horrified. He said it was unusual, the similarity of my voice to my brother's. I even imagined what it would sound like, and my mom agreed. It was exactly the same tone, voice, everything. So, I'm wondering if you have any theories as to why this is happening. Why do these similar creatures show interest in humans? My gut tells me it's just to tease and scare us, but I wonder what other people think. About 11 years ago, I was working as a communications engineer. On a typical day, I would go to several houses to install or repair phone lines. It was as good as the other day. But then I got my next job and posted 20 lines. This was unusual for my position, as such tasks were usually delegated to other teams. But there was no problem. I thought it would be good to stay somewhere longer than an hour or two. I think it's better to be here, there, and everywhere. I called the call center and was told that the caretaker or building manager would know and explain what would be required of me when I arrived. I arrive, and it is a very old building, built in the 1920s, as I'd later find out. I walk in, as usual, with my tester and tool bag, and after talking to the receptionist, I learned that the building was once a nursing home, and after years of abandonment, it is now used as offices for various businesses. As promised, 2 managers came in and said that they thought what I was looking for was in the basement because there were lots of cables and they knew everything. I then asked if there was a tutor here. He usually knows about these things. I was told that it was not because he was sick, but because he should be back in a day or two. I follow the man and woman to a locked door. They open it, tell me the code, and on the other side of the door are stairs leading to the basement. Well, he comes in. We talk for 5 minutes, and he tells me to start on the administrative side and work until he's done with me. After a short bathroom break, I'm back, and I'm already on the last step. I connect phone numbers so that when my friend comes over, we can go to the test. When I do, I hear, "I'm sorry." Once again, Gordon is getting nowhere, so I acknowledge it, call it smart, and joke that if they can't find you, they can't ask you to do something. I keep working for 5 minutes and try my best, so I tell him I'll help my friend. We'll be off work soon. Gordon then said he enjoyed our company and was happy to socialize. At this point, I was very upset, thinking he was being mistreated by people in the same building. So I told my faithful spouse that it doesn't take anything to be nice and sociable. So I go up the stairs, leaving Gordon at the bottom, and help pull the cable through the gap into the basement, We spent 10-20 minutes trying to get through it, but we managed it. Went downstairs, Gordon wasn't there, and we were done. It's time to eat, and my friend comes to the chippy to meet me in the yard, and I tell her I need some signatures, and the lights are on, so I grab an extension cord. I take the necessary signatures from the manager and tell him where the extension cord is behind the front desk. I tell him he needs the extension cord so the light is good in there now, and that's it. Or he wants me to leave and there's good light in there, and he says they can stay for now. And if anyone else needs it, it's another cord will take it. I go down there. I go downstairs and start turning off the light. Then Gordon shows up again and says he doesn't know the light is mine because he doesn't touch it. I immediately thought, oh, that's why they were there this morning. But then I realized the door was locked. I asked him if he came in yesterday, and he said, yes, of course I'm here. I need it here. Confused and wanting to disappear, I said, don't worry, nice to meet you. I waved. It was a little weird, but I went and signed and thought nothing of it. A few weeks go by and I get a call from the department asking if I can go back to this address because one of the lines is down and he's active. I reply, yes, no worries. I walk over and once again greet the receptionist. I ask if I can take a look at him before I go to the basement. To my delight, it was there. You just need to set it up correctly. While I'm sorting it out, an older man asks me if I was there last week. I was. He apologized and said he was a caregiver and had to take more vacation than planned. I told him, don't worry, dude. I'm sure Gordon will tell you where everything is. And when I said that, he looked right at me and asked, what did you say? I said, Gordon. He told me he's a tutor here. This guy looked completely white and asked if we could talk outside. Of course, I followed him and he asked me if I believed in demons. Then he told me that what was here was now. It was a nursing home and an old nurse. His real name was Gordon. He knew this because when the building was torn down, he found an old desk with Gordon's list, letters, and requests, and under the door was a plaque with the caretaker's name on it, and where the desk stood was a door leading to the basement. I rejected this theory at once and began to laugh, thinking he and his friend were cheating on me. He then asked me if I wore socks, to which I replied. He looked right at me and said, look, buddy, I'm not lying. Gordon died years ago, probably on the job. I thought you should know. And it's not considered funny when he tells me he's laughing because he saw Gordon too, but people never believe him. I never said anything extra until I went fishing with a friend one night, and like he said, he thought I let it go. But I know what I saw and what I heard. I usually don't tell anyone this because it's not funny, but after this experience I can tell you that demons or spirits are real. On June 3rd, 2016, I hosted a social event. I was hosting Instagram and the event was a golf tournament. I asked my followers to go on social media, so it didn't surprise me. The tickets, of course, were $250, but I somehow didn't care. It was a potluck, and he came through tipsy, but had a good time. She was also an Instagram model I knew online. He asked the day after the tournament. I was a single mom, and because of the event, my parents had to go into labor until the next day, so I said yes. We went on dates, went to bars, ate out. The man was handsome, but mostly damn charming. We drank beer and then offered pot in the car. I rarely smoke, but that day I decided what the hell. We sat in a hot box and then went to a bar. He was friendly with everyone and made me laugh a few times. Then we went to a liquor store and finally to his house. I was drunk and high, so it was easier for me to sleep with him. He had a bunk bed and I remember him lying on it, being very selfish and aggressive, and I was scared. But I didn't stop him from being scared. I got behind the wheel and my car was still parked on the golf course and it was too far to Uber to my car. The next morning I went to the bathroom and there I saw a long pipe coming out of the toilet. He got mad because he and his roommate had a pipe to water the growing grass. I didn't know he was drunk and didn't realize it. I apologized and honestly was a little scared. We went downstairs and I cast my first glance at the walls and furniture. Knives and tools hung all over the house, used as decorations. I waited for his breakfast and, trying not to show any fear, I was taken to the car. In the car, I realized that I needed an excuse to hurt her feelings, so I was very happy and very sad for her because I loved her very much, but the father of my child died when she was 1 year old. It was the truth, and I can't take her to a foster home because I have someone next to me who grows weed and stuff. I don't care about his pot, and I don't want him to change, so it was a bummer. But the last time he left me, I let him kiss me. I was shaking when I left because of the vibe, but the next day when he left me, he met a girl 10 years younger than us, and an 18-year-old Minnie like me. She dated him for 3 weeks before he dumped her. Apparently, he chased her like crazy, and was even arrested a few times. In September of that year, he got out of jail for the last time, went to a bar where he met the girl and took her home. He kills her, and it's an absolutely horrifying story of what happened to her. He is now serving a life sentence for his crime, and I wonder how he could have ended up in his shoes. The summer of 2008 was a difficult time to graduate from college. I had been pursuing a degree for 4 years and then found the job market drying up. I was devastated that I would be unemployed for the foreseeable future, and that summer I developed a deep love for camping and hiking outdoors. Having grown up in the Rocky Mountains and graduated from college in western Montana, I was not new to camping and hiking. But that summer became almost an obsession for me. Daily hiking and camping under the stars helped my mental health at a time when I was worried about my life's purpose and my future. It was June outside, cold, wet, and overcast. The temperature reached 50 degrees during the day and dipped below freezing at night. Regardless of the weather, I planned to go to Anaconda Proving Ground this week, and I wasn't going to put it off. My plan for the week was to hike from Storm Lake, through Storm Lake, and up to Upper Seymour Lake. Storm Lake is actually a high-altitude body of water that is not easily accessible and requires a 4x4 truck and driving skills. The road is a narrow 2-way roadway through pine forests. The road was slippery from the rain, but I made it without a problem. I camped on the north shore of the lake and decided to fish. The fishing was not good. It was cold and nothing special. When I went down there, the light was very faint, but I didn't have the opportunity to work under those conditions. I mean, there was light, but you're talking about pendant lights that weren't very good. Realizing this, the woman tells me that there are pendant lights, so no problem. I go back to the van, grab an extension cord, and head back to the basement. As we pass the receptionist, she asks us, "Will you be alone in the basement?" Yes, sometimes I'm fine with that, but I don't think I'll stay here if it doesn't have what I'm looking for. He laughed, but he told me, "You're a better man than I am. Nobody likes to go down there, even to salvage stuff." Honestly, I thought people didn't like stairs to dark places. It's not a big deal, but it's familiar to me, so it's worth doing. The manager and I quickly find an outlet. I take apart the bulbs. Yes, there is a DP I'm looking for, but it's an old unit that isn't suitable for broadband, so I let him know he needs it. A little more, and before I even realized where it was, it shouldn't take 20 steps. He just agreed and pointed out where the installers had left the client cables. In the cupboard behind my reception area. So, all set up, I know what I know, and get to work. I check all the lines and all goes well. I'm more than halfway through all the closets and some are shy, but I know the area, and I know I can get through them because there are two 200-pair cables. By this time it's about 4 o'clock and I don't have the necessary devices in the van, so I label the cables and turn off all the lights before closing the door on the way out. I sign, tell the girl behind the counter I'll see you tomorrow, and leave. When I get home, I call the manager to discuss the script, and I may need help for half a day or more because I'm not sure if anything else has been done on the exchange. The next day, at 8 a.m., one of the guys calls me and says he's been with me all day and knows it. We agree that we'll each take a roller. I'll move the couples from the box to the cabin, and you do the cabin if necessary. Then all that's left to do is set up the box and put the sizes in. From there to the cable TV reception desk. I go back into the building, use the code to unlock the door, and to my surprise, all the lights are on. I'm 100% sure I turned them off. Yep, I think one of the managers came to check on my presence and may have left them by mistake. I go downstairs, whatever I do, I go to pull the cables. I call my friend, and he pulls them out one by one, so all is well. I finish up and go back to set up the blocks. I do the blocks, the exercises, all the exercises, etc., etc., etc. I put Mark down by the pilot holes and I hear, "What are you doing?" I say, "I'm doing what I'm told and you're the quarterback?" He says yes, there was no one there, and was surprised I was there. So I went on and started drilling, etc. Then when I stopped drilling and calmed down, this guy started talking. "What soccer team do you root for? Do you mind if I take a look at your work?" I told him I wasn't worried, and I tried to be as polite as possible. He then told me his name was Gordon, and he had been working here for over 30 years. A little embarrassed, remembering that the receptionist had said this, I informed her that the seats had been empty for several years, but judging by the telegrams, they had been renovated at least 15-20 years ago. He said there is always something going on here. About an hour later, while I was working, I heard a greeting at the top of the stairs, waiting for Gordon's reply, but didn't get one. Then it came again and I turned around, but Gordon wasn't there. I think I've been wandering around for about 10 minutes and he's still gone. I pick up the phone and one of the managers asks if I'm expecting someone, another engineer, to which I apologize and explain that the phone signal isn't very good there, so he couldn't reach me. But the best part about the bad fishing was that my thoughts were free to wander while sitting on the shore. It rained the whole time, and there was natural white noise, and it was great. As time passed, my reverie was interrupted, and the sounds of the rain were drowned out when a faint sound came from the canyon. The hum didn't sound like the operation of a distant diesel engine, but there were no roads other than the one I was standing on in the tent. No equipment or vehicles are allowed in this canyon. It might be an airplane, judging from the rain clouds. But the voice didn't come any closer, it was still above me. It came from across the lake and out of the canyon. But the sound was kind of still. It always seemed to me. It certainly wasn't an airplane or a truck or a bulldozer. And while none of it was horrible, my hair stood on end as I sat and listened. After 20 minutes, the screaming subsided, and I heard the sound of raindrops again. Soon I caught a decent trout, cleaned it, and headed back to camp to get ready for dinner. The fish was perfectly cooked, but frankly, I hate trout, so it was certainly edible, but completely boring to me. They tasted like dirt. I think I ate as many as I could, and threw the rest in the lake. Set on fire for the night, I went back to enjoy my evening whiskey. Night came quickly. The mountain range shut out the early sun, and rain clouds blocked out the starlight. The night was dark, very dark. The sound of the warm fire and the rain falling from my tent was very soothing and lulled me to sleep. I remembered that I needed to make a fire before I went to bed, so I walked over to the gathered pile of firewood and grabbed his hand. But as I stepped away from the fire for a moment, I caught a familiar rumble growing behind me. It grew stronger than before, closer. I thought to myself, perhaps I've had too much whiskey and I'm tired. That sound had ruined my whole ride and my mood. Frustrated, I shouted into the darkness, "Hey, stop!" Like a key, the yelling stopped. So did the rain. I'll admit, at that moment, my heart raced. I realized that this was more than just a coincidence. There was some mind, something intelligent, watching me and reacting to my screams, and I didn't get the most positive vibe from it. I threw all the spikes into the fire and went back to my tent. I tensed up more than ever and sat listening to the flickering of the fire, my rapid breathing, and moreover, the silence of the darkness. Before, I had felt alone but safe. Now I felt alone and vulnerable. I felt like there were millions of eyes looking at me in the darkness where the light of the fire had gone out. My paranoia began to subside when suddenly it started to rain. It wasn't rain, it was torrential downpour. I was glad I had time to build a fire, or it would have gone out. Unfortunately, my tent was destroyed by the force of the storm. I considered getting in the truck, but realized I would never hit a bone. Risking injury or death due to moisture is a whiskey-only logic, right? I could feel the rainwater collecting and moving under the awning. The storm had not abated. Even more interesting was the urge to get in the van. I could pick up my stuff tomorrow afternoon and spend a few nights in town, but I'm a little overwhelmed. I thought driving on this slippery and muddy two-way road was a death sentence, but I still needed a place away from the tent. So grabbing what I could, I opened the roof panels and ran to the truck. By the time I got in the driver's seat and locked the doors, I was soaking wet. I turned the fire on full blast and hoped it would dry me out. It was going to be an unbearable night, so I leaned back in my chair and tried to calm my mind with deep breaths. The rain didn't stop. I was warm from the heater, and fortunately I was in a good whiskey field. Despite the rain, the campfire was still roaring and lighting the camp well. I remember the clock in the truck showing 1:06, and then I closed my eyes. It only lasted a moment, but when I opened my eyes, the rain had suddenly stopped. In fact, everything was hazy and quiet. Only embers remained of the once blazing fire. The strangest thing was that darkness reigned in the east in the morning. I immediately looked at the clock on the truck. It showed 5:45 a.m. It was morning. This couldn't be happening. Almost 5 hours had flown by in the blink of an eye. I must have passed. My head suddenly started to hurt. Honestly, I don't think I drank that much to have such a hangover. I turned off the car and got out to check out the night's wreckage. My roof was completely blown off. The roof pillars were broken. Everything was wet. And after putting out the fire, I loaded all my stuff into the van and threw it on the bed. There would be no passenger transportation today, of course. But when we packed up camp, it was about 6. It's 30 in the morning, and as I climb into the cab of the truck, I hear the rumble through the fog again. Hearing it, I rush away from it down the dirt road, without looking in the rearview mirror. I had never been to Storm Lake, and frankly, I would never go back. I was 10 years old, and in those days, my friends and I would ride our bikes, looking for adventure or discovering something new and interesting. But this time, my neighborhood was a mix of new and old, and it was easy to find old tunnels, agricultural waste, or worn-out roads. So on a summer day, we took another boy in addition to the main team. We didn't officially know each other yet, but we started biking anyway. We came across an abandoned house near a farmer's field and woods. We started looking around the building and decided to live there for a while. We went inside, looked around, and started chatting. But at some point I started to hear a sound like the sound of moving rocks, gravel, or water, something like a leak from the basement. I thought it was my friends playing at home and immediately ignored it. But suddenly there was a scream, and the sound of gravel got louder, like someone was throwing rocks or something. I froze in place, unable to imagine my friends making such sounds. Suddenly we were talking really fast. My only friend started crying uncontrollably. His brother, a very brave young man, preparing to defend his brother. Together we could see the lobby and the stairs. The newcomer screamed and waved for us to come out. But we were in shock. How or what had made that sound? How could he have been unaware of our danger? What was the big deal? I wanted to hug him. This might be his last moment on the planet. I watched as it descended the back stairs leading to the basement. He was still screaming and repeating the same motions. He fell again and disappeared. We yelled at him not to leave, but he kept doing the same thing over and over again. In doing so, it was as if it sped up, 2 or 3 times faster. I can only describe the voices in the basement as pure despair, pain, and agony, but they were definitely human, or at least human-like. We yelled to this guy that we were leaving, and he sort of came out with us. Furious, we drove as fast as we could, never once looking back in fear. It was getting dark, and we didn't have time to get ready again, so we immediately split up and went home. The next day, I asked my friends if they had seen the other boy, and thought it was a friend of our group. We talked for a while and realized we didn't know his name or where he was from, and never saw him again. So, I'll try to put these events in chronological order. They were between the ages of 14 and 20. For context, I'm 22 now. This village is called Modzka, located in Poland. I haven't lived there for about 2 years either, but I want to mention my warm friend Jacob, who will be very important a few times. So first of all, the forest itself was huge, I guess for Polish forests. My friend and I used to spend a lot of our free time there. The forest had no master, and we enjoyed exploring it. We built a small bridge next to the stream so we wouldn't have to go around it or jump over it. After a few days of construction, we came home from deep in the woods. A rock flew from a tree at me and almost hit me. We joked about it then, and for a long time afterward, and truth be told, the situation was dire, because the rock was big enough to kill me if it had hit me. We didn't pay any attention to it, of course, didn't make a big deal of it, but it was harvest time, and I remember there were bales of hay in the fields at that time. We liked to jump. We chose fields that were more wooded, so the farmers wouldn't infest them. It was getting dark. The sun was setting. We walked more slowly, and when we got back, we saw a dark figure behind a small stream that, for one thing, this forest had been crossed several times. We too looked at the figure for a while, but then we could not understand what it was. But we laughed and said that it must have been someone throwing stones at that time. Thirdly, we saw this figure twice more, the day after the previous event, in the same places. Fourth, the last part where my friend was with me, and deep in the woods we found something that looked like a rabbit hole, only bigger. We've seen too many rabbit holes around here, so I doubt we'll get it wrong. Nearby we found a traveling suitcase with strange contents. From that moment on, my friend stopped going into these woods too. Something must have scared him. I personally enjoyed running in other parts of the forest, especially in the evenings. I encountered a phenomenon I called the breath of the earth. At one point the ground was rising and falling regularly, and it was great to watch. But this is where things start to get weird. As usual, I traversed the road, but on this day I turned back. On my run, I heard an unnatural sound coming from the bushes. Over the years, I've had encounters with wolves or foxes, but this was different. There didn't seem to be anything in the bushes, but rather than tempt fate, I turned back and walked home. The scream itself was deep and hoarse, and finally, and strangest of all, I was old and swarthy. It was one of the few trips we took after dark. I honestly don't remember why, but as I was walking down a long path in the woods, not far away, but in a thicker part of the forest, I heard something. Sounded strange, but a choir, kind of like church singing. I'm no expert, but it sounded Latin, so I ignored it. And when I came back some time later, obviously I didn't hear anything else. But years later, my friend and I came to the conclusion that there were probably black masses or something similar in that forest. Also, some very suspicious vehicles have been seen in the area in recent years. I don't believe it myself, but honestly, it's a possible explanation. In the end, who knows how this will turn out, but I don't think I'll just go back to the safe side. So, about 5 years ago when I was 17, I visited my in-laws who lived in South Dakota and worked there for the summer. About a month later, my brother, sister, and her husband decided to do what Americans do best: go shooting in the woods. I had to work the evening shift, so we decided to go after 10:00 p.m. After my shift, we went to their house to get food, guns, and ammo. The trip took about 45 minutes and was on a dirt road surrounded by trees and tall grass. Eventually, the clearing was opened up and became quite open and decent. The nearest tree was about 100 feet away from me. It was dark, but the clearing was illuminated by the headlights of the truck. I felt uneasy for some reason, but I asked her to go out into the woods at night for the first 20 minutes. Nothing much happened. We put plastic bottles and plastic buckets of water in the office, but it seemed like everyone was watching us. And then suddenly there was the smell of rotten eggs. Your gun knows what that smell is, and I do. Even after serving in the military, I never smelled a gun or an explosion once. We looked around trying to find the source of the odor, and I still remember what I saw. It was a slender humanoid figure, squatting down and looking at us. Even bent over, it was still over 6 feet tall, and when I say the figure was thin, I mean skin and bones that couldn't be described as such. But even that was strange. We saw this figure in different places in the branches of the tree, but we all described the same features: tall, lean, with long dark hair. Anyway, we quickly packed up what we could and left. And the horror of that day haunts me forever. My brother mentioned at the time that it was a local neighborhood, but I don't know if that's true or not. Every now and then I think back to that day and look for different stories and encounters of people in those woods, but nothing like what I saw that day.